It doesn't matter. If they are a born child who is autonomous, they are not equal to a fetus.
Bronte says if they're a born child who is autonomous, they are not equal to a fetus. Bronte is showing once again that she has a hierarchical way that she stacks the value of human life, and she does not see all human life as equally valuable. That is not a good way to think. Scary people in history have had this thought before, and it always leads to awful societies. Yet, weirdly, it's always the leftists who seem to think like this, despite always saying they are the compassionate ones. Is it compassionate to not see all human life as equal?
Bronte, oh my goodness, what do you think little babies are like if you think they're autonomous?
So you're confusing biological autonomy with functional autonomy. Would you like me to define those for you?
Please do, yes.
So biological autonomy is when your bodily system can support itself, your organs can support itself, and you do not need to be connected to another person biologically for your body systems to function.
So maybe like a baby in the womb at 25 weeks.
Sure. When abortions do not happen then, abortions that do happen then are largely because of medical conditions. And so that is not what we're referring to.
Bronte is very telling here when Michael says, oh, so maybe like a baby in the womb at 25 weeks. He was only talking about biological autonomy. Bronte, however, defensively reacts and says, abortions do not happen then. Michael never said anything about abortions. He was talking about biological autonomy. Bronte got scared and knew that abortions later in development are looked upon less favorably than abortions in the first trimester, so she quickly had to defend something that wasn't even brought up. It's very telling that she actually knows the wrong that she's supporting, but still chooses to do so.
That is not what we're referring to.
They don't happen then, or they do happen then, but
they do not happen often then. They are like less than 1% of abortions happen.
And yet for some reason...
Wait a minute, Bronte, so it's less than 1%. So it's a small number. So it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter?
And yet for some reason, states in America like New York are changing their laws in a hurry to permit abortion up until the moment of birth.
Abortion does not happen up until the moment of birth. That would be an induction of labor. But
but Bronte, they did change the law in New York such that, and they actually changed the penal code such that abortion is permitted in the state of New York up until the moment of birth. That happened.
That is a misrepresentation of the law.
That's exactly.
But if you
it changed the penal code such that if you kill a pregnant woman, it's no longer double homicide. They could not more clearly point out, they could not more clearly highlight through the statute that abortion is permissible at any point in pregnancy up until the moment of birth.
See, it seems that you consistently want to demonize women and you want to feel as though pregnant...
I'm just describing the law in New York.
No,
Bronte, your lack of inclusive language is appalling. Demonizing women? Does it bother you to use inclusive language, Bronte? Also, Michael's right. If a law that says killing a pregnant woman no longer counts as double homicide, then it is saying that the law no longer counts the woman as having another human inside her. Maybe we should go back to the vocabulary when we used to say she is with child, to refer to someone who is pregnant. Maybe people would get a clue then that a human is growing inside a pregnant woman. Okay, Bronte, if it's not something that happens, then why are you mad about what Michael said? If no one is doing it, then there's no one for Michael to demonize.
But when you describe abortions happening right up until the moment of birth, you are describing someone who has carried this fetus for 9 months, 40 weeks, whatever it may be, and you are acting as though those people are completely unaware of the situation that they find themselves in. And usually people who are at that point in their pregnancy have decorated the nursery, have picked out a name, have went to prenatal appointments, things like that. And so for you to try to say that women are wanting abortions right up until the moment of birth, you are demonizing them. And you are saying—
I'm just describing their behavior.
But women aren't doing that. That is not something that happens. It's not something that happens.
So then why do they keep changing the law in all of these liberal states?
They're changing the law to protect women and protect women's access, because there's also a lot of these laws that are trying to criminalize women for things like miscarriages. And so rewriting these laws...
Oh, for God's sake, the left has been using this fear-mongering tactic that miscarriages are going to be prosecuted and women will be thrown in jail for having miscarriages. The left is also conflating the words miscarriage and abortion. Miscarriage is an accident. Abortion is an intentional act. Both result in the loss of a pregnancy, but accidents are not prosecuted because they are accidents.
All of that is protected, and especially because of the Doe decision. People don't realize that the Roe v. Wade decision was really two cases, Roe and Doe, right? And Doe creates this right that protects women's ability to have abortions for psychological reasons, for emotional reasons, practically until the very end. And so that already exists. That was already protected in New York. There was no risk whatsoever in New York that abortion was going to be criminalized or miscarriages were going to be criminalized or whatever other propaganda comes out. So if you're telling me that abortions do not happen late term, why would multiple liberal governors and state legislatures change the law to permit abortion up until the moment of birth?
I'm not saying that I agree with those laws, but I also believe from what I've read as well that a lot of those, the way that you're describing it is a misrepresentation of the purpose of the law, but I'm also not saying that I personally agree with those laws, if that is what they state.
Michael never asked if you agreed, Bronte. He asked, why do the laws exist if the activity isn't happening? You don't need laws for things that no one is doing. Bronte, of course, knows this, and evades Michael by refusing to acknowledge that people are getting abortions at 25 weeks. She also knows it's wrong, so she says, I'm also not saying that I personally agree with those laws if that is what they state. Just to cover her ass, I guess.
Oh, good. Well, that's good. Why do you disagree with them?
Well, because as I've said numerous times, I'm prioritizing the needs of the pregnant person, and 91%.
But if you're going to prioritize the needs of the pregnant person, surely they should have the greatest window possible to have an abortion, which would be up until the moment of birth, like in New York.
I don't believe so, because I believe if you've reached that late term in the pregnancy, then at that point, then the fetus is somewhat autonomous. It has the ability to be viable and autonomous, and that is when their life can and should be, weighed heavier.
So
Bronte is still holding consistent in her human life has a hierarchy position when she says, I believe if you've reached that late term in the pregnancy, then you know at that point that the fetus is somewhat autonomous. It has the ability to be viable and autonomous, and that is when their life can and should be weighed heavier. When she says weighed heavier, it's obvious she thinks humans aren't equal based on what life stage they're in.
Post-viability, you think abortion should be illegal?
With the exception of medical concerns.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, by medical concerns, do you include emotional distress, or do you mean real serious medical risks to the
not to discount medical or mental concerns, because those can be serious, but primarily physical.
Wow, so you would support a post-viability abortion ban?
Yes.
Great. Oh, that's good. That's progress.
With the exception of
Sure.
medical and protecting medical providers based on certain scenarios.
So
Bronte seems to really hold medical providers in such high esteem that it seems like she's idolizing them. She thinks their expert opinions are facts, and it's obvious to me here that she doesn't want to admit that she could be wrong, or that Michael has any good ideas, so she makes a point to say she would still accept exceptions so that she doesn't piss off the abortion gods.
Post-viability, okay. So then I guess I have to ask, why? Why is viability so important? Why is independence so important? Because a baby who's born, a newborn baby, can't do a damn thing. You leave the baby outside or even inside for 72 hours, the kid's going to die, right? Maybe a little bit longer.
Functional autonomy versus biological
right,
autonomy.
But practically it's the same thing.
It's not. Biological
It is.
biological autonomy and functional autonomy are two very different things.
But they're distinct.
Yes.
But practically speaking, they're the same thing. Because if you leave the baby, who you say is biologically autonomous, if you leave that baby alone to his autonomous self for, let's say, 5 days even, that baby is going to die. That baby has no control over himself or his surroundings at all.
Because they
So
lack
it's a distinction.
functional autonomy. So,
Right.
and the,
So
the
it's really a
difference here-
distinction without a difference.
No, but the difference is anyone can provide food and shelter to that infant, where only the singular pregnant person can provide the womb for the fetus. That is where, and you can surrender your parental rights. We cannot force someone to be a parent. They can give up those parental rights. And that is the same thing in pregnancy, because you cannot force someone to use their body and use their time in a way that they do not agree with. And
Do you think parents of children who are 5 years old should be able to just renounce them and say, go away? Renounce their parental obligations?
I mean, if they're incapable of providing a safe home.
No, what if they're capable and they just don't want to be a parent? It's just their consent.
If they're not, but if they're not mentally willing and capable, then the child
I'm not
will be
saying
taken.
capable, though. Let's say that they are totally capable. It's some rich lawyer with a nice house in the suburbs, 2 cars, nice dinner every night. They just don't want to be parents anymore. You think they ought to have the right to renounce their parenthood?
That seems like that would be better for the child.
I'm just asking about the right.
No, but I wouldn't want the child to grow up in a home where they're unwanted and resented. So yeah, I think that they should be able to give up their parental rights, because that doesn't seem like an appropriate environment for that child.
Well, if you're saying Child Protective Services should go in and take the kids away, maybe there's an argument for that. But I guess it's just this right part that you keep, because you keep coming down to consent and rights.
Mm-hmm.
If you're saying that a parent of sound mind really has the right to abandon his own children, that seems crazy to me.
Michael is talking about responsibility here. His whole point is, if you have a child and you kept it, you are then responsible for it because you are the parent. The child is not just a car that you can sell off when you get tired of it. That is the point that Bronte doesn't seem to understand.
It's prioritizing the wellness of the child. I would never want a child to grow up in a home where they're resented and abused because their parent isn't willing to take care of them. Why should we force a child to stay in that environment?
We're not talking about what is prudentially best for the child. I'm really focused on...
That's not what we're prioritizing, the needs of the child?
Well, it's just not the topic of discussion. What I'm asking about is the rights. You're saying a parent has a right to renounce his or her child?
Again, if it is prioritizing the well-being of the child, I think that the government...
What if it's not? What if it's worse for the child? Why
would staying in an abusive home...
No, I didn't say it's abusive.
Why, a neglectful home?
I'm not saying it's neglectful. I'm telling you, all things being equal, this guy, this nice guy and his wife, good jobs, good money, nice house, they take care of the kid just fine. They just don't want to do it anymore. And they'll do it if they have to, but they just don't want to. And it'd be a little easier if they could renounce the child. I'm really focusing on this question of rights, because I think that's where the abortion argument really starts to unravel. You're saying they have a right to do that?
Again, prioritizing the well-being of the child. If they're in an environment in which they are unwanted, then that is not an appropriate environment for them. And I believe that if a parent is unwilling to care for that child appropriately
It is obvious to me by Bronte's responses that she doesn't believe in personal responsibility. She's of course unwilling to admit that, so she evades Michael and accuses him once again of lack of compassion for the needs of the child. It makes sense that Bronte wouldn't acknowledge personal responsibility, since she thinks that women shouldn't have to be held responsible for whether or not they get pregnant in the first place. And if she admits that anyone has to be responsible, she will have to admit that trying to get rid of the consequence of a child would be wrong. Bronte evades Michael again and keeps bringing up the abusive, neglectful home angle, despite him saying multiple times that the home is perfect and that the parents are just bored of the child and don't want to take responsibility for raising it anymore.
Appropriately.
Yeah, I just think you're not accepting the...
No, I just think that you
accepting
continuously want to ignore the well-being of people that we share society with.
I don't want to kill them.
Bronte sticks with her losing argument of accusing Michael of lack of compassion, and he owns her again by saying, well, I don't want to kill them. And she shifts uncomfortably in her chair again at timestamp 1 hour, 42 minutes, 45 seconds, which is telling of her knowing something isn't right about her position.
And whenever I bring up the well-being of people, it seems like you're like, that's not the discussion. I want to brush this off. Because that is what I...
rights too. And then when I focus on rights, you shift to well-being. And then when I focus on well-being, you shift to rights. And so I think you're trying to evade the topic.
No, because they're intermingled, right? Our rights protect our well-being, and our rights basically have a large effect on our well-being. So they're not two exclusive things. We decide what our rights are depending on the way that they affect our health and our well-being and our mentalities.
We decide what our rights are?
As a society.
So where do you think rights come from? This might help me to understand your view on abortion. Where do you think rights come from?
Michael asks where our rights come from. And I'm just going to answer really quick. The Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and the Bill of Rights. Let's see what Bronte says.
Well, it depends on what kind of rights you're talking about.
Oh, Bronte said it depends. I see. That's such a concrete answer. Yeah, she has no idea where rights come from.
Because in a society, we, like our government is a system designed to protect our rights. That is the purpose, yeah. Right, that is the purpose of it.
So the government protects our rights, so where do those rights come from?
I mean, I think it's a convoluted question because essentially if...
Bronte continues to be unable to answer where rights come from, gets frustrated, and then evades Michael by accusing him of asking her a convoluted question. His question was 7 words long. Does that sound convoluted to you?
Essentially, if we were cavemen, we wouldn't necessarily decide that we had rights, right?
I don't know. I think cavemen were a lot smarter than we give them credit for. Oh, the only thing we know about cavemen is that they painted on the walls. The only thing we know about cavemen is that they were artists. So I think they probably had a pretty good intuition of these things.
Right. But I mean, our rights don't necessarily come from anywhere aside from our own analysis of our human experience.
Oh, so then we don't really have any rights at all.
The rights that we have decided on based of the analysis of our human experience, we have decided that these are the rights that prioritize the health and well-being of society, and these are the things that we need to protect in order to prioritize the health and well-being of society.
So you're saying that my rights are just whatever I say my rights are?
No, our rights are what our society has decided on a large spectrum. And there's, we look at the...
Okay, well then our society on a large spectrum has just decided that abortion is not a right. And in about half the country now, abortion is severely restricted, if not outright illegal. And so those are our rights, and there's no arguing with it.
So again, 61% of Americans, which is the majority...
No, I'm talking about the Supreme Court and the legislatures.
Right, but that's
how our government...
Michael owns Bronte again when she says, as a society, we have decided what our rights are. So he says the Supreme Court has just legislated on a societal scale that abortion is not a right in half the country. Bronte shifts uncomfortably at timestamp 1 hour, 44 minutes, and 54 seconds because she knows she's just been owned.
That's how our government.
Right, and that was
our government's not conducted by Pew Research.
And that was stacked corruptly.
When I talk
about society, I talk about both society as a general sense, and then society as also the experts as it pertains to that right in particular. So when we talk about 61% of Americans, according to the Pew Research Center, agree with the ability to access abortion in all or most cases, and 95% of OBGYN said regardless of their personal feelings, they would help a patient access abortion. So that is what I mean by coming to a consensus as a society about what is a right that should be protected. And both society as a whole and the society or the group of experts largely as a whole has decided that this is a right that should be protected.
Michael asks, how was it stacked corruptly? It meaning the Supreme Court, and Bronte evades Michael once again. Bronte says that because her statistics are higher than 50% in both society and the Pew Research Center, that means those opinions make our rights. She's not understanding that opinions are not laws. Opinions are also not facts, and opinions are not always correct. The morality of an opinion doesn't change just because more people allegedly have the same opinion about something.
But so I think you're ignoring the way that our society is actually governed. The civil authority in our society has decided that there is no right to abortion. That just happened. The Supreme Court just decided that, which is in keeping with the longer jurisprudence throughout the United States and England and elsewhere in civilization. Mm-hmm. And so that was how the actual civil authority in our society that governs us determined we would live. And so then I would say if that's your understanding of where rights come from, you should accept those rights. But then you respond to that and say, no, that doesn't matter what the civil authority says through our self-government because of this one Pew Research survey and because of the trade organization for the obstetricians. So
no, because
who is the we and we decide our rights?
As I've said, pregnancy is a medical condition and abortion is a medical procedure. And so when I talk about the experts and when I talk about people who should be deciding these things.
So our rights come from the experts.
It comes from society as a whole, in addition to the experts, and society as a whole is typically guided by experts.
But society as a whole, well, what represents society as a whole? Is it the civil authority, or is it?
No.
No, it's not.
No,
So what is it?
because
It's public opinion
the
polls.
government is meant to serve society, and if society decides that something should be protected, as
Then they
a majority,
lobby their representatives, and in self-government, the representatives pass new laws and appoint different judges, and the judges make rulings about statutory and constitutional interpretation. And in this case, they've said there's no right to abortion.
But as I've said, the legislation is not appropriately representing the needs and desires of the people.
How could you say that?
Because 61% of Americans believe that abortion should be protected.
So you're saying that the way that the people in our self-government express their will is through a Pew Research survey, not through our elected representatives at the ballot box on Election Day, but through some survey from this one.
No, our
institute.
desires are represented by surveys, but we have abysmal voter turnout here in the US. And so what is represented in our legislation isn't necessarily representing the desires of the people.
Bronte,
it should, but it doesn't.
But so I don't think that our rights come primarily from just what we all sort of agree upon. But even if I did, you realize how absurd this sounds. You're saying that our system of self-government, where we go to the polls and we elect our representatives, they're there to represent us, imperfectly as a fallen world might do, but that's what they do there. You're saying that is not the way to understand the will of the people, but just like one survey of, who knows, usually these are 1,000 to 2,000 people, that is the expression of the will of the people, even when other surveys contradict it. That seems a little silly, right? If you're saying our rights come not from the civil authority, but from the Pew Research Center, that seems a little silly, doesn't it?
Bronte is ridiculous. Surveys are biased, both from the view of the research center and the view of the survey takers. Pew Research Center has a lot of left-leaning ideas, so of course their abortion surveys will be worded in such a way to skew the results towards abortion. The amount of people taking the surveys isn't an accurate representation of everyone either, because they don't often survey that many people.
No, it is very clear as of recently that our representatives are not properly representing the will of the people. And like I said, we have abysmal voter turnout.
By the way, who controls the government
In what way?
right now?
I mean,
Who has
money?
unified government today?
A lot of money
Who would be
controls our government.
Which party controls
Well,
the government right now?
I think the Senate is the Democrats. Our presidency is a Democrat. And then I believe the House went to the Republicans, or it hasn't been called yet. I haven't.
Well, the Republicans will take the House in January when they're sworn into office.
Yes.
But today, we have a unified government run by the Democrats. And so when you say that our government is not adequately representing the people, I agree with you entirely. But
Bronte doesn't want to answer that the Democrats aren't the ones not representing the will of the people. So she evades Michael by pretending she doesn't know what he means, until he asks, which party controls the government right now? And she has to answer Democrat. Although I'm not sure why she thinks this is the point where she shouldn't embarrass herself, because she's already said the most embarrassing statement in the world when she said having sex with children or animals being illegal. That's because they can't properly consent to have sex.
Yeah, but
would
we
be
also
good.
have a filibuster, which is essentially, kneecapping our ability to pass proper legislation that is the will of the people.
But the representatives of the people agreed to have the filibuster in the first place.
Right, and that is a point of contention right now. That should be
Sure,
abolished.
I'm just saying the filibuster itself was an expression of the popular will in the
But
self-government.
it's not right now, and it should be abolished according
Well,
to.
they can abolish it if they want to, but it just hasn't been done yet by either party.
Correct.
Right, because
Yeah, and I disagree
because
with that.
Sure, you might disagree with it, but the politicians do not abolish it because presumably they believe it's in their electoral interest not to abolish it because they are accountable to the voters. And so, regardless of what you think about the filibuster, nevertheless, if you accept the premise of self-government, Republican government at all, that expresses the will of the people. Right?
Well, also, we live right now in a binary political system in the United States, which our political spectrum as a whole of society doesn't exist in a binary. Nothing exists in a binary. And so when we only have one of two options, it's not going to accurately represent the desires of the people, which is a big problem in our political system.
Bronte says, well, also, we live right now in a binary political system in the United States, which our political spectrum as a whole of society doesn't exist in a binary. First, Bronte says our political system is binary. Then in the same sentence, she says our political spectrum doesn't exist in a binary. What? Leftists give me a headache.
Do you call yourself a Democrat?
No.
You're not. What do you call yourself?
I'm more of a leftist.
You find the Democrats are a little too weak.
Financially, yeah. I don't agree with all that the Democrats do, but I believe it was Obama who said that voting is not marriage, it is public transportation. You aren't going to find the one, but you take the one that is getting you closest to your desired destination. And for me, that is the Democrats in our binary system.
But you're not a liberal. You're a leftist.
I'm a leftist, yeah.
You're a feminist.
Yes.
You know, I find myself, I don't know, maybe I'm going crazy in my old age, but I find myself agreeing with the radical feminists more
Really?
and more than I do with the leftists. Or I'm sorry, more and more than I do with the liberals.
Okay. Elaborate on that for me.
Well, there was a great clip that was going around of Catherine McKinnon. Are you familiar with her?
No, I don't think so.
Catherine McKinnon, wonderful, great radical feminist. And it was her debating some conservative over porn. And she made this point. She said, you know, you conservatives, some of you conservatives, are tolerant of porn. You think porn is no big deal. And obviously, since the internet, it's exploded everywhere and it's caused a lot of problems. And she says, but you know, imagine if you were in your apartment and you heard some guy knocking a woman around every single wall, abusing some woman. And what would you do? I hope you'd go over to the apartment, try to stop it. I hope you'd call the cops. But that's what you're doing when you're watching porn. And this weak conservative, he said, well, you know, but people have a right to look at whatever smut they want. And she said, what are you talking about? You know, that's completely insane. And the conservative said to her, well, don't you agree with that? All these free principles of just watching whatever you want? She said, no, because I'm not a liberal. I'm a feminist. I'm not a liberal. And I thought, I guess maybe I'm a feminist too. Who knew?
Yeah. I mean,
Would you describe yourself as, she called herself sex negative. You know, that's the kind of anti-porn feminists. Are you the anti-porn feminist or the pro-porn feminist?
yeah, because largely the pornographic industry is a huge issue as far as perpetuating and supporting sex trafficking and human trafficking. And so, no, I'm not a supporter of the porn industry as a whole. Now, as far as like
I knew we'd agree on something.
I noticed Michael asked Bronte to choose one of two options, and she doesn't. He asks, so are you the anti-porn feminist or the pro-porn feminist? Very simple question, but her answer is some rambling about the porn industry being a huge issue.
Yeah, and as far as like sexual liberation and the ability to, you know, consciously and responsibly consume porn, I'm not necessarily opposed to that, but the large porn industry as a whole, as it supports sex trafficking and is largely unregulated, I am,
And is it only the trafficking that bothers you, or is it the women who are involved in porn come from bad backgrounds almost all the time, and usually neglectful and abusive backgrounds, and they're very vulnerable, and they're completely exploited, and they're paid pennies, and they're treated literally like meat, and then they're thrown out 2 years later, and it's just the whole thing's so ghastly. And it's not that's not a matter of trafficking exactly, but it's still an exploitation.
Yeah, I agree.
You're opposed to that, but then you just said that you don't mind people watching porn in certain circumstances.
Bronte has a lot of contradictory answers regarding the porn topic. She opposes the porn industry as a whole. She is in favor of people watching porn. She is in favor of sexual liberation. She opposes sex trafficking. Someone has to make the porn in order for people to be able to watch it. So you cannot be opposed to the porn industry as a whole and then say that you are okay with people watching it. Those are two contradictory opinions that cannot be held simultaneously. I think this is just further proof that Bronte doesn't have any original thoughts. She is just saying what she thinks her leftist friends would approve of, even if it's all nonsense.
Right. if the industry was better regulated, people were paid living wages, there wasn't this whole situation where people feel, pressured or forced into that industry based off of certain life experiences or certain circumstances.
It's 100% of the time.
Right. Well, not necessarily 100%. I do feel like people can consensually and responsibly,
Themselves like meat.
I mean, that's not necessarily what happens. I think that is sort of dehumanizing, and I think
It is dehumanizing.
Right.
Yeah.
Bronte then says she is in favor of people getting paid for doing porn. She also says she opposes people being pressured or forced into doing porn. People who do porn most of the time feel pressure to do it because it is easy money. So if you keep offering money for people to do porn, the people who feel like they have nothing to offer except their body will take the money. It's a cycle, and you can't have it both ways. Michael asks if Bronte feels like people should responsibly treat themselves like meat, and Michael owns her again. Bronte gets flustered because she cannot defend her ridiculous position and accuses Michael of dehumanizing people, which hilariously backfires because he says, yeah, it is dehumanizing. Which is the whole point of why he thinks the porn industry is bad. Michael owns Bronte again.
But that's also removing the consent aspect, because there are a lot of people who do sex work responsibly, and they do so of their own volition.
Before you were sounding sex negative like the radical feminists. Now you're sounding sex positive like the liberals.
Well, I am sex positive, but it depends.
All right, never mind. I thought we agreed on one thing finally, but okay.
We agree that we both do not like the porn industry as a whole.
But would you ban it?
The porn industry?
Yeah. It's, frankly, according to the law, it already sort of is largely banned. It's just a few court decisions kind of screwed that up. But.
Yeah, I think that things like OnlyFans should stay legal when they are run. I think that if it is run by the worker themselves and it is they're deciding to do something of their own volition, then I'm not necessarily opposed to that. But I do think that the porn industry should be banned or regulated as a whole.
Well, that's good. So people should not be permitted to look at Pornhub, for instance. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, I think Pornhub should be shut down because a lot of it is, unregulated and kind of there's a lot of things on there too that perpetuate abuse, that perpetuate, radicalist ideas of, objectifying women, and so that, I definitely not.
So, does that not undercut a little bit of your argument about bodily autonomy and doing what you want, in your own bedroom with the blinds closed? If a guy wants to go into his bedroom and pull up some disgusting pornography and do whatever with his own body, sex with someone you love, as Woody Allen described it. Is that not a matter of his personal bodily autonomy that he allegedly has a right to?
I believe he has the right to do that, but like I said, it doesn't have to be.
You do?
It doesn't have to be done through Pornhub. There are responsible and worker-run.
But what if he really likes Pornhub? What if that's his favorite one?
Well, we don't have to protect his right to access Pornhub. No, I don't believe we should. No.
That's good. All right, that's something. But OnlyFans, you think is okay?
Yeah, I think OnlyFans is okay because, like I said, it is run by the workers themselves, and they aren't exploited by an industry, and they aren't forced into certain things.
Don't you think that pornography intrinsically is exploitative and degrading? I guess that's my problem with it. There are other problems too. But it's not just the consent is what I'm saying. Because you seem to think that the only moral criterion that matters is consent. Mm-hmm. If you consent to do it, then it's fine and dandy. But I think there are plenty of things that you can consent to do that are not good and are degrading and feed your basest passions and enslave you and should be illegal and are illegal even today in some cases.
Yeah, elaborate on that.
Well, like drugs would be an example, right? I don't think you have a right to do drugs, but I don't think you have a right to do all sorts of things, I don't think people should have a right to cheat on their wives. Maybe a married man consents to sleep with his secretary or something, and the secretary consents. I think that should be illegal, and it was illegal for a lot of American history. I don't think you ought to have a right to that. I don't think that if you are under the delusion, if you're a man and you're under the delusion that you're a woman, that you have a right to chop your healthy genitals off any more than you would have a right to walk into a doctor's office and say, "Doc, I identify as a quadriplegic." And the doc says, "Man, you got problems. You need to go see a psychologist. I'm not going to chop your limbs off." Mm-hmm. But then that same man walks into a doctor's office. He says, "Doc, I'm a woman. And that doc says, wow, oh my gosh, that's so brave and wonderful. You're a stunning, beautiful woman. Let's get you onto the operating table and cut off the family jewels. That seems to me preposterous. I don't think anyone has a right to that. I guess ultimately I'm saying, I don't think you have a right to wrong.
Bronte's ideas about porn are all over the place, and once again they contradict each other. She says she is in favor of OnlyFans, but not Pornhub. That a man who likes Pornhub shouldn't get to use Pornhub. Instead, he should use OnlyFans because the workers put themselves on OnlyFans. Essentially, she's saying that if a person exploits themselves, then it's okay for others to exploit them as well. Michael brings up the fact that people can consent to all sorts of awful things, and that giving consent doesn't change the morality of the thing you are consenting to.
Well, what we define as wrong is different between you and I, because I do agree in providing gender-affirming care to people, because when you are in a body that doesn't feel right to you and you do not identify as the gender that people perceive you as, that can have psychological consequences. And again, when we look at medical experts who study this and provide this care, they agree that gender-affirming care is essential in order to prioritize the needs of these patients.
What about Dr. Paul McHugh?
I don't know.
So Dr. Paul McHugh was a doctor at Johns Hopkins and was the pioneer of the gender transition surgery and was the head of their gender clinic. And so he pioneered the whole thing. Then he found after a few years that it wasn't improving psychological outcomes. He didn't find that it was damaging psychological outcomes in most cases, but it just wasn't really doing anything. And it wasn't helping, and so if it wasn't helping, he shut it down. And so he's not only one figure in the transgender care medical community, whatever. I mean, he's a preeminent figure in it, and he says that it's awful and we should stop the surgeries. So does his expert opinion color your views at all?
No, so in medicine, we are taught something called paternalism is something that we should avoid. And paternalism is essentially putting your own personal views into the healthcare of other people. So if you believe that a patient is going to regret this decision, then you are going to, prohibit their access to this. And as medical practitioners, as physicians, we are taught to avoid paternalism, and acting paternalistically is unethical.
So that's an interesting use of the word paternalism. So by that you mean just having opinions and acting on them?
No, it is a specific terminology in medical ethics. It is not prohibiting your patient's access to medical care based off of...
Bronte says one of the first true things I've heard from her during this entire conversation, when she says, well, what we define as wrong is different between you and I. This should alarm you, viewer watching this. If we as a society cannot agree on what is defined as wrong, then society can go down some dark paths, because if people can just say something awful isn't actually wrong, it will derail society. After Michael explains who Dr. Paul McHugh is, Bronte proves she only takes expert opinions from experts she agrees with, by evading Michael and changing the subject to paternalism. Paternalism in ethics means choosing a course of action in the patient's best interest but without the patient's consent. This served as a protection for the patient in case the patient thought they needed a treatment that was unnecessary. Removing paternalism, removing that protection, is a bad thing, because now patients who have no medical knowledge can tell their doctor they want something harmful and the doctor has to oblige. That doesn't seem like any kind of health care that I want.
But you would give advice.
Right,
but say, I don't think you should chop your genitals off, or I don't think you should have an abortion.
See, and that is putting your personal opinion that is unrelated to medical studies and unrelated to proper psychological practices.
Why would you hold a personal opinion that is completely out of step with reality? Would you? I mean, I just fail to understand this distinction between a personal opinion and, say, a public opinion,
a professional
opinion. Yeah, I just don't see if they disagree, the professional opinion that you're supposed to hold and your personal opinion, and if they're contradictory, only one of them can be true. So if the professional opinion is true, then why do you hold your mistaken personal opinion? And if your personal opinion is true, then why would you give a damn what some lunatic who's telling you to perform a lobotomy has to say?
So when it comes to medical practice, your personal opinion is colored by your own personal experience, where your professional opinion is influenced by evidence and training. And
But is your personal opinion not influenced by your faculties of reason and your moral conscience and your ability to perceive reality?
True, but my moral conscience and my ability to perceive reality is based off of my own personal reality, and my personal reality differs from someone else's.
Well, hold on. I thought the purpose of reason and perception is to ascertain objective reality. It's not like the imagination where you're just concocting your own fantasies, right? So what you're telling me then is that your faculties of reason and moral conscience are not reliable and they can have nothing to say about objective reality. So then I have to ask, why should I care what you think about anything?
Well, it depends on what you're asking me my opinion on, because again, there's a difference between personal and professional opinions. Because when professional opinions, especially in medical practice, are colored by statistics and training, that is going to supersede my personal opinion when it comes to offering someone medical advice.
So are you saying you simultaneously hold two opinions at the same time? Or are you saying that you just defer to the board of obstetricians on every question?
I'm saying that I understand as a medical professional that I need to avoid paternalism, and that although my personal opinion and my personal experience and my perception of life based off of, my own worldview isn't going to be completely accurate when it comes to the life experience of a patient sitting in my exam room.
So
Bronte says that her personal opinion isn't going to be completely accurate when it comes to her patient's life experience. I find that insane coming out of a potential doctor's mouth, because when a patient goes to see a doctor, they are going there because the doctor is supposed to have more knowledge than they are about what's ailing the patient. That's the whole point of a doctor going to medical school. I think doctors should be allowed to feel their morality, because if they don't, that can lead to awful things. I also think nothing should be followed blindly, even if it comes from medical experts. Medical experts may have a lot of knowledge, but they are still human, which means they will make mistakes. Then if you have a medical expert with no morality, they will put in awful protocols, and people like Bronte will just blindly believe them simply because they have the title of expert. And then society will go to hell in a handbasket.